Thanks for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is a scene that I just stamped out. It's wet, freshly stamped in more ways than one. I used a VersaFine, and if you have a VersaFine instant dry pigment ink black, or really probably any of the colors, I don't know how many colors this comes in, stamping it on in the foreground, like up here and down here, you probably know that it doesn't dry very quickly on glossy paper. And I don't know, it's been a while since I used it, so I couldn't remember that. So what I did on this scene, after stamping, coloring, and I don't think I put in the embellishments yet. I stamped these foreground elements in here, and it just took forever to dry, and I even spray sealed it with a workable fixative, and I thought that would dry it out, but it didn't. So things are still a little bit wet. So learned something about that pad and ink in this process here, but I also learned that I love that, super dark, rich black as far as a foreground ink, because it just stands out. You can see the Marvy black back there, and this is the VersaFine, so it's a really thick black ink, and it works great for foreground because it really pops those images out from the background, and you can really achieve a deep, true black with it. But anyways, this scene here is about kind of a row of trees, and it kind of harkens back to some memories of growing up where I did, where I believe it was probably the Civil Conservation Corps or the California Conservation Corps, I'm not sure what. They, planted a lot of eucalyptus trees along the California coast, and these days these trees happen to be kind of a target area for a lot of migratory monarch butterflies. So now these aren't necessarily eucalyptus trees, or gum trees as they call them, but I just used my Mossy tree trunk stamps, both sizes, and created this row of trees. And instead of a kind of a straight path like the ones that I used to kind of hike along, I used the dirt road. So it kind of curves off here in the distance. Two impressions with the smaller mossy trunks, and the tree right here and here in the background was used right here just to kind of nestle the pathway. And I felt that structure of the path and these trees kind of created a nice area, kind of a stage for those two figures in there going off walking to the distance. And if you see all these, this is kind of weird in terms of an element in the scene, but when I was stamping this out, I was wondering, the whole purpose was to kind of put in these little monarchy types of butterflies. I was going to put them hanging up in the branches, like what you see when these monarchs migrate. They're all kind of clustered up in these trees, and I think they do that at night for to kind of share warmth, and they kind of start falling down to the the floor of the area. And they kind of start fanning their wings. I guess when they're too cold, they can't fly, so they kind of fall around. And pretty soon, when it warms up a little bit, they're they're flying around all over the place up there. So that's what those little orange little elements kind of represent. And it looks kind of weird that people probably wondering, if they don't see a video like this or something like that, what those things might be. It could represent flowers or something like that too. But anyways, I just used kind of a Uniball Signo orangish red and a Uniball Signo pale orange, I guess, for to kind of give it a little bit of a two-tone look. I added this one in there, but it looked really weird. So putting that little touch on there, I think, kind of brought those objects to life. But anyways, one of the things I mentioned in a previous video sometime was one of the things that's really great about stamping and doing any kind of artwork, composition, is that we can see things that we haven't seen before, and you know, created by your own hand. And this is a composition and I think a color scheme that I haven't really done before. So I guess because I'm going after something, I'm referencing kind of something specific as far as the location and time, and I'm starting with that. But as I say in the video, you know, even if you're doing something like that, or you can be referencing a photograph too, you know, scenes kind of have to go off in their own direction at some point in time based on our availability of, you know, imagery that we're using, colors, and whatever techniques that we can utilize to kind of, I wouldn't say replicate something, but reference it kind of in a as close as possible, you know. But as far as the colors that were, you know, created and whatnot, and the imagery that it was used at some point in time of this scene, probably 2/3 of the way through, you just have to kind of, you know, start going off in its own direction, you know, just to serve this scene as opposed to the memory of the, you know, the moment that you're trying to capture, reference in some way. And I think that works out better that way than to just try to be so, you know, locked into a, you know, a photograph or something of that sort. So anyways, especially when it comes to the lighting, the background, I got a little smudged back here when I was doing all those brown trunks. I didn't think I was getting in between them, which was going to be blue, but as it turned out, I feel that kind of hitting some of these colors in the background in the sky might have served it, you know, very well. Or it didn't hurt it, at least, you know, in terms of straying from my original idea of, you know, powder blue, sky blue, you know, light blue sky. So, I don't know, it might have brought a little bit more continuity to it that way. So maybe it changed the time of day to more of a, I don't know, could be a morning sunrise or something like that. But anyways, it was a fun scene to do, and it was a fun scene to kind of embellish. I was really surprised at the VersaFine, you know, didn't dry after the workable fixative, but I'll, you know, come up with something. I'll probably spray it with a Krylon Crystal Clear, something like that. And I think that will seal it off, and whatever chemical they use in that, those different types of spray sealants, I'm guessing should get into the ink a little bit and dry it off. So, but as I say at the end of this video, I'm not in any hurry for this to dry, so I can let it sit for a while, and we'll see how that goes as far as the drying process. But really fun scene to finish off, and I don't know, I especially kind of like the lighting in here and the kind of the darker perimeter of trees, you know, creating some kind of canopy. So fun stuff. So hope you enjoy it, and thanks as always for watching the channel. Okay, let's see if I can come up with this composition that'll be satisfactory as far as this idea that I have in my head, as far as kind of the gist of what I want to accomplish here. This one I think is going to be kind of tough, but it's always a good thing to kind of stretch your, I don't know, kind of capabilities, or I don't know, just things in terms of compositionally, you know, to come up with new and hopefully some exciting twists on what you already done in the past. Okay, I'm thinking about these trees here in the foreground. This is a fairly large design, so you have to get kind of pressure over the entirety. I'm not stamping the entire thing either. There's, you know, this fits about like that, and the thing with large stamps, you just stamp as much as you need, and going off the page is, you know, one of those things that you do with scenic stamping, or you can. You don't always have to stamp the entire thing like a word stamp or something like that. You know, that would look kind of strange where if it was missing, you know, part of the image. Okay, there's those trees. This is a road here. I'm gonna try to stamp this road in here. I go with something like that, I think. This is called a dirt road. I'm just keeping things really simple here as far as the structure of this composition goes. I'm just stamping it black, in other words. I'll bring in my color after. But one of the things in this composition that's going to be key is that I want there to be some hanging branches. And, you know, let's see how that goes. Alright, now I stamped those mossy trunks once. I'm going to do the smaller version kind of back here. Okay. Like something like that. Or so. Going to have to mask off a little bit. Okay. All right. My very in-depth, high-tech masking technique as far as this tree trunk goes will be just cutting out a piece of paper towel about like so. Okay. And that looks good to me as far as masking that trunk goes. And we'll see how this goes. Okay, put a little bit of extra pressure around that mask. Okay. Okay, I get a little bit of a, I forgot what I used to call that, where it doesn't go into that next tree, but, you know, we're going to use some, we're going to use some more imagery in here so that could fill in that little space right there. And that's from kind of that mask maybe not being narrow enough or not enough pressure there as well. Okay, let's go for one more image using this kind of smaller mossy trunks. Maybe I'll use, I was thinking about maybe using the top portion, maybe not having so much of the base of it. Let's take not that. something like this. Okay. It's kind of a row of trees moving off into the distance. And, go for another one back there, but maybe not. Alright, so that is going to be kind of the foundation composition right there. I want some hanging branches in here too, because that's going to be really key for this composition and kind of theme of the scene. So this is some the hanging oak. This is called the oak branch small. Okay. I don't necessarily need it to be oak trees or anything like that. I just want some foliage to kind of be dangling from up above. Okay. Now, let's see, some colors to use in here. We want it to be fairly dark, okay, but I think I do want some variation of some greens on it. So I'm just going to color it black. And then maybe I'll just try to get a few little green touches, you know. It'll be kind of a super dark green, black green. But hopefully just a slight variation in it, just to get some color just inherently in these forms or this shape. Okay. You don't want it too light because then the trunks are just going to show, you know, right through it, which will be fine in some ways, but we don't want it. I don't want it to be predominantly like that. Okay. Same thing. Just ink it up with black. Hit it, you know, a few little highlights here and there. Okay. Some more branches. And this one, just in the background, I'm just going, which is all black, like that. Okay, so we have this kind of this visual momentum going this way. Let me switch out this piece of paper here. It's kind of busy in some ways in terms of the texture and the visual movement that's in there. I tell you what, normally I just kind of keep these types of things for the last, you know, part of the process, you know, some kind of foreground elements, but I think I want to see what I'm getting here earlier in terms of the overall composition. Okay, so let's put in some reeds. I want this composition just to come together a little bit faster in terms of the imagery. All right. It's the reed stamp. Just kind of anchoring those trees down a little bit. Kind of a stronger foundation. Put some on the side of this road as well, on this side. I'm kind of masking it off so I don't stamp out the entire image. Just because I don't want the blades to be that high, you know, that large in some of these areas. Okay. Let's get a little bit of texture going in that background. I mean, it looks okay as is, but it can use a little bit just a built-in texture. You know, I'm saying that before I start to color it in, just to put a little texture back there, just to give it a little, the scene a little bit of a kind of a more, well, textural foundation as far as things that are going on in the background behind the trees. And because, you know, this stamp here is just basically texture, you don't have to mask off all these trees, which would really be a pain. Okay, now I had to mask off this tree here because, you know, this trunk here is fairly solid. But something like light and airy like this, you can just stamp it right over the top, and it doesn't appear as though the sedge filler is in front of all of these trees right here. Okay, it just kind of blends in with the background, which is the entire point of, you know, that design. As far as how it was stylized, you know, is to avoid having to, you know, do a lot of masking, especially with some kind of element like that. That's supposed to be just a filler element. Okay, so we have our foundation here. And now this one here, I mean, we don't have some kind of big open area with like a mountain and a big meadow or something like that. So, you know, as far as like a lighting scheme goes, I don't see, you know, myself putting something in here. Maybe I could, you know, there's a little bit of a horizon line right here, and I could have, you know, some sort of lighting. But just in terms of this kind of forest floor type of thing, I'm thinking about, you know, this is a path right here, so I'm going to light that just by bringing in some darker tones around it. But I don't necessarily want this to be a dark scene, but I do want this to be somewhat illuminated for my eventual characters that I'll put in here. And I don't know, so kind of deciding on whatever color scheme I want to go with will be key, and also kind of what colors to color in these trees. I'm thinking brown, you know, maybe the background can be some versions of green or something like that, brown in here, tan. But let's keep this a little bit light, okay? So that's, you know what I mean, there's nothing more kind of complex in terms of my design goes. My design, I don't know, thought process than something like that. I'm thinking about it, one thing I'm thinking about doing, see how this kind of wraps around, like I'm thinking about putting just one tree trunk right here, and I think that might be kind of interesting to do. So let's do one more thing here. I always say, you know, a lot of times something doesn't really reveal itself. Not that, you know, every choice you make has to be like the absolute, you know, definitive, ideal way to do something. But like right here, I thought it'd be kind of interesting just to put that there, so it'll kind of nestle this pathway, you know, this road to the trees. It'll put it, you know, in between them. Alright, let's see, which tree is it? Okay, it's this one. Okay, like something like that. I'll wipe off the bottom of it a little bit. And okay, better, huh? I think. See, it puts that road curving around that tree right there, so this kind of gives me that tree right there. I don't know, I guess for me compositionally, and it ends up being fairly important because it's more reminiscent of this kind of path that I'm looking to create here in this scene. Now those trees are a little bit moist, you know, because there is a lot of black in them, a lot of solid area. Well, it's not solid, but it's very dense, I should say. So I'm going to allow that to dry and really set up, because I've really stamped in a lot of different imagery in here at this point in time. A lot of times, like I said, I save those kind of foreground types of textures, grassy textures and things like that, and hanging trees are often left kind of for the end of the scene as far as the color application goes. So this one, I'm going to wait for this to dry a little bit before I go into it. But as long as I'm doing that, let me see. Okay, this path is going to be a little bit, brownish tones, so let's go in there and add a little bit of texture. Okay, this is the tiny rock stamp. Alright. Stamping it in antique linen, the distressing color. It's very light, which, I don't know, sometimes I just kind of wonder what people are using these super light colors for. I love them though, because I can kind of build up and, add a lot of texture to something in a very incremental way. Alright, this is the tea dye color, okay, so working a little bit darker to layer those tones into the scene. Okay, tea dye, and let's go with some walnut stain. Okay, see what I'm doing here? It's putting some textures on that road. Now, over the top of that road, we're going to add a lot of color eventually. Okay, so I guess if I'm waiting for this to dry, I might as well get some of this imagery in here that I would do anyway. A lot of times I do it after I already add the color, but since I'm going to be waiting for this to dry a little bit, then let's just add it in right now and not have to worry about that. Okay, so I'll give this a few minutes and we'll get back to it, and I'll start adding some tone, and we'll try to really take this very, very busy composition and kind of just mellow it out a little bit in terms of some tones around there and some illumination down in this area, and hopefully that comes out kind of interesting. Okay, we're back, And the scene is completely dry. Now it's time to start applying some tone here. It's kind of interesting. I touch this and it feels textural. I think my my Marvy pad is starting to disintegrate more, and it's leaving a little bit of residue on the impressions here, due to the I don't know, the fact that the pad might be disintegrating. Yeah, I can see it. Very old pads. I'll have to see if I have some more of those somewhere. But if I don't, I will buy a blank Marvy pad and just ink it up with the re-inker fluid. Okay, let's see here. There's a lot of different ways I can go with this. I can go with kind of a, you know, green background, green grass, and maybe some brown trees or something of that sort. Or I can go with, you know, more of the summertime grass, brown grass type of thing. I think I will go with some greens. Maybe I'll do somewhat of a kind of a mix, you know, somewhere in between, maybe earthy tone background as far as the grassy, I was going to say the grassy area, but that's really this whole area in here, and you have these tree trunks in here, so the background area, I guess, you know, the back of these trees, I'll try to hit it with some different tones of green. But let's just get right on into it. Okay, I'm going to try this distressing peel paint. I used that in one of the recent scenes, and I really like that kind of more earthy looking green. But in this green here, I'm also going to be kind of defining my light source within the scene. Now this area in general, I want it to be kind of, I don't know, it's under tree cover, alright? So I do want some shadows in here, but this is also the, you know, the main kind of leadway, the visual kind of entryway into the scene, so I don't necessarily want it to be all dark in there, and my subject matter is going to be in there. So, as I've mentioned in, you know, a lot of other videos, a lot of times I don't see this as like a necessarily, you know, somewhat of a realistic lighting scenario, but kind of more of a stage in which you're taking kind of the position of a lighting director, and you're just lighting your set accordingly, okay, based on the subject matter of the scene, the focal points, whatnot, okay? Alright, so laying down some ink, leaving some areas a little bit lighter than others down here, even if that pathway of the road is somewhat brown or tan, kind of earthy dirt, you know, looking. You don't want it to be completely different as far as a hue goes from the surrounding areas, otherwise it'll look kind of fragmented. So I'm going to run some of this, a little bit of green into that road. So you can see how it's kind of coming about, you know, so far. Threw a little of that green on the interior here and put some on the road. You can see some of the green on some trees. And that will give the scene, you know, some continuity. Between all the different color schemes that are working in here. Okay. Kind of doing this type of thing. keeping it very narrow. I'm using the edge so I can get a thinner streak of color, and I'm putting it into those trunks. Not that I necessarily want green trunks, but I want some of that color in there. Okay. I don't know if I want mustard seed. Let me go with some. Let me go with some of this antique linen. Okay. It's a very light, warm, earthy tone. I don't know if I'll be able to see it at all, but we'll give it a test here. I think my antique linen is a little dry. Let's try the tea dye. Okay, that's one of the colors that I stamped the tiny rocks in, I believe. This tea dye it's a fairly light hue, so I'm using it quite freely in terms of the coverage in the scene. Laying it over my greens, putting it up in the tree trunks. You can really see the kind of lighting scheme coming about. Objects are getting kind of fleshed in more. There's an opacity to them by coloring the solids. Okay. Let's try the walnut stain. Walnut stain's getting kind of medium, darker toned now. Blending some of it into the road. Okay. Where I stamped the tiny rock image. Things start coming together when you use the same color that you did on the impressions, the images. A little bit more on the tree trunks. Okay, making the base of the tree trunks a little bit darker, so that they're kind of casting shadows now, a little bit more so, by adding those darker tones to the base and the area surrounding the base. Okay. Alright, now let's go back and let's introduce a little bit more green into it, okay? Maybe we can give it a little vibrancy, or I can go kind of dull at first. Let's try that. Let's go with a a pale green. It's kind of like a sea foam green. And it just has less yellow in it. It's more of a kind of a pale blue-green. But it's just kind of experiment, you know, just test it out, see if I like it. I don't have anything real definitive as far as the notion goes, as, you know, with what I want to do. Test it out and see if you like it, you know, with whatever colors you happen to have. In this case, green, try a different green. My recommendation is to start light, and that's what this one is. And it's also not very bright in terms of the intensity, so it's not really making a huge commitment to this given hue because of both the value and intensity of it. If it was really super bright, like a bright yellow green, then it would be, you know, you're making a real big commitment to that color. Like this one, I mean, if I use this one, it'll, you know, it'll probably make a certain area pop much more in terms of the just the visibility of it, you know. It'll be a little bit more apparent. Now I'm running this over some darker tones in the background, you know, so it's not that as big of a change in the background as if I stamped it or used it, applied it over kind of white paper. Okay, sometimes the shadows are brighter than other areas. Brighter, not lighter, but brighter, just in terms of the intensity. Just because the colors aren't washed out due to sunlight. Okay, a little bit brighter coming around. Let's try this jungle green. It's getting a little bit darker. And again, I usually like to build things kind of incrementally. I don't like to make huge jumps in value, usually. And that way, if I kind of layer these colors on, I think just the colors become, the end result looks nice and rich and deep in terms of the color saturations. Alright, let's play around with a couple other tones. I don't know if that bamboo leaves looks like the jungle green, so we can leave that out. Let's try the cottage ivy memento. Test it out in the shadow area first. You know, an area that's already kind of dark, you know, to get a kind of a feel for it. With the base of these kind of trees, and then a little bit more in the background. Okay. Cottage ivy. Let's see. Let's go with some darker brown tones. Let's try the Marvy brown and dark brown. Let me switch back to my other tip here from my green one. Switching over. I use Marvy brown quite a bit. One of my favorite colors. Very warm, warm, bright, and solves a lot of problems for me. Visual problems, you know, when certain colors are too kind of hot in terms of like reds and oranges. In my sunset scenes, I use this brown a lot to kind of mellow things out, make it a little bit more earthy. But it enhances, it doesn't just, you know, eradicate something. Okay, I put it on most of the trees, but now do you see how the trees are kind of, they really look like they're floating. So what you have to do is you just have to add in some shadows down here to anchor them down, kind of at the base is what I would recommend. Let's add a little bit more to those trees. Okay. Now this isn't a real dark brown, so this is just kind of the first tone that I'll add at the base. Well, I mean, I've added other tones, but from here on I'm talking about. We'll need to go probably to some much darker green and something like a, you know, like a dark brown in those areas. Maybe a little bit on the road too, just to incorporate that hue and that intensity into the scene. Okay, let's try the dark brown. Maybe on some of these trees I'll try to color like one side of them so that one side of the tree is a little bit lighter than the other side. So it's like it's turning, you know, in a given space. So if the lighting is kind of coming from here, then I'll make the right sides of these trees a little bit darker. Okay, let's see if I can do that just using this sponging method. Okay, I don't know if you can see, one side's a little bit darker than the other. A little bit. You notice I'm working on this scene upside down a lot is because I have much easier access to these trees from this side, right? So you don't always have to work on it like that. A lot of times, if I'm working it like this, you know, from my vantage point, I can't see the tree. But if I could do it like this, you know, and I'm right-handed, so I can just kind of go right alongside. I can see where this edge is touching the, you know, the tree. So just turn your cards kind of in the direction in which making your mark is the most conducive in terms of control, and you know, that control is usually based on, you know, visuals, you know, being able to see what you're doing. Okay. Now on this one I'm going for the tops of it so I can turn it this way. Okay, here, let's get down at the base of these trees again. Trunk base. And some of this dark brown into the road. Okay. Kind of it's a little bit more anchored now. All right, let's get a little bit of color going in that sky area. Let's do a... We can do Memento Summer Sky. Let's do something else. I'm looking at that sky area and I get a little bit of brown in between those trees. Okay, I don't want like a blue-brown sky. So let's do this. Let's make that sky. Let's just go with it, okay? And there's already brown in some of these areas. I kind of smudged in between some of these areas in here. All right, like that. I guess I wasn't being careful enough, but let's just go with that and add a little bit more of that same color, okay? I'm just going to use the Memento Desert Sand. Okay. And I'll kind of create a little bit of horizon with this tone. Maybe it'll seem more, you know, not necessarily dusk or dawn, but I don't know, maybe, I don't know, maybe moving in kind of that direction. Let's see. Trying to decide on the color right now. Pale oranges. Kind of like desert sand. It's a little bit warmer than that desert sand one. Try a little bit of that up there. Let's try a pink as well. Let me get a little bit of this tone off that. A little bit of that brownish tinge. Okay, let's try... Let's try rose pink. Slightly warm-ish pink. It has just a touch of kind of yellow added to it. It is really, really subtle. I mean, I can see it in the kind of the areas where there isn't very much color laid down at all. But as I always say, if you kind of bring this, the colors that you use in certain areas into other areas, it'll add that little bit of continuity, so you have that little slight pinkish, you know, glow going up there, and you kind of bring it down here as well to add a little bit of continuity, very subtle continuity between the two regions. Okay, you can even add it down here in the grass, believe it or not. And if it goes on some of the trees, that's just fine too. Alright, that is good as far as the color scheme goes. Now let me see. We've changed the time of day in here, I think. So maybe it is more of a dusk-dawn type of thing going on. Let's add, at this point in time, some deeper shadows, okay? Now, I'm going to go with black, because that is the same color that I stamped out my trees and path in. Okay, now I've got to be careful about this because I don't want to get kind of an unwanted mark at this point in time. Just kind of, it's almost like I'm kind of painting on some of this color. So again, it's just a real thin strip like this, okay? And I'll do it on kind of the base of these tree trunks. Hopefully this will really start to anchor, kind of visually anchor the trees into their place. See that? I just did it from about here. You can tell the difference between this bottom portion and this portion up here. But maybe I will trail that into that area a little bit more so. And maybe just do it on one side of the tree trunk, so it just looks slightly more cylindrical. Okay, like that. Do the same for that second grouping of trees, second grouping of 3. Now maybe where there's that canopy of leaves up top, branches and leaves, I can kind of make the tops of these trunks a little bit darker, perhaps. I'm kind of just making this all up as I go along. I don't have some kind of notion that you make the base of a tree darker and in that the top portion you make it a little bit darker, going into it ahead of time. I'm just kind of seeing what might look good as I do this, or if anything occurs to me visually. So you just try to keep an open mind and being willing to test things out. You don't have to know these things ahead of time. I wasn't thinking anything like that. For me, I'm kind of thinking about variation, for the most part. Okay, now on this tree right here, if more of the lighting is right here, then maybe on the left side of this trunk I'll put, kind of a darker thing, whereas the trees on this side, it's on the right, the shadow is more on the right side. down into the terrain, anchoring the trees, meaning that. Okay, now if you want to make things a little bit more contained, you can throw on a bit of a vignette type of effect, meaning making the kind of the four corners of your scene darker. That'll kind of create more of a focal point with, you know, within the scene, wherever you want your viewer's eye to kind of be, you know, drawn to. Okay. I like the interior here. It's really kind of glowing now for me. You know, doing all these little things with the shadows. And I think the texture kind of is nice and incorporated in there now. Kind of the shadows make things a little bit more dreamy looking too, you know, in terms of I don't know, maybe like a location. Okay, now compositionally for me, this is still kind of missing something. So what I want to do is I want to add in some additional foreground and maybe just some darker branches or something like that in the foreground. I think I used the smaller oak branch in here. I'm thinking about some larger ones. Not to clutter up this whole thing, because there would be a danger in doing that, but just having some larger forms out here just to kind of push the depth of field within the scene just one step more. And I mean, the impressions are pretty crisp, but I think I want some darker impressions, just one additional layer just to sandwich, you know, all the different forms in here, and I think that brings some additional continuity to the scene as well. So we'll test that out, and let me see, let me go grab those images. Okay. Here's some different images that I'm thinking about. Oak branch, large, for some overhanging branches kind of coming from above, like so. Some larger reeds, or grassy texture in the foreground, okay? That'll really push the kind of the depth of field. I was thinking about this in the background. It'd be kind of interesting to have a fence back there, but then I would have to mask off that tree, and I'm not really quite sure if I want to do that. Yeah. I'm holding that there to imagine it behind that tree. Huh. And let me think about that one. Anything that really makes me kind of work a lot harder in terms of scene, I tend to not do that. So if anyone looks at a scene like this, I mean, there was very little masking. I don't like doing a lot of that type of work, when I'm doing my scenes. I do try to keep it simple. In the end result, when we say a finished scene, hopefully it looks fairly complex, but I don't like a real complex, kind of tedious way to get there. I like adding color and things like that, kind of as a free form method as possible. Okay, now I have a VersaFine and Memories ink. Sometimes those inks can be a little bit darker and thicker than, say, my Marvy black that I tend to use, for most of my main imagery. Now, I don't even know. I probably haven't used this Memories in a while, so I'm not even sure how moist the pad is. It might be kind of dry. VersaFine, dry pigment ink. Let me try that one. That one seems a little bit wetter. But sometimes going with these, now some people use the Memories inks as their main black, but sometimes for me I had to wait longer for that to dry than my Marvy ink. I guess it just depends on where you live too, in terms of the relative humidity. Alright, the Memories ink would work fine, but it's probably really old and a little bit slightly dry. I mean, it'd work okay, but this VersaFine looks like it's ready to go. I haven't used it in a long time, though. Doing a test print, that looks really good. And plus, I'm not sure how the VersaFine would work as my main images, and then kind of toning over it. I'd have to test it out to make sure that it didn't, that it won't smear and drag any of that color, which is kind of happening with my Marvy ink now because it's the pad is really disintegrating. Now when I say that, if you haven't watched these other videos, that pad of mine, Marvy pad, could be 20 years old, so if it's disintegrating, it's not because of quality. It's just, it's due to age. Okay, it's going for a couple prints, impressions of this, which looks good. See this down here? I think that looks really good. Just in terms of an additional layer of depth within the scene. You can go out here a little bit more, but I think that's enough. It makes those trees just kind of nestled into the composition a little bit more. And I think I'll go for another one. I'll go for one out on this side. Okay. One or two. We'll see. Yeah. One more. Okay. So, kind of frames off that foreground a little more. That VersaFine looks really good. Okay. It's really wet. I don't know if you can see that little glistening ink on there, but it's fairly wet. But you can see how that kind of stands out, that those trees in the background are fairly wet. I mean, dark, but having that VersaFine on there, just going with something a little bit thicker, blacker, for the foreground element looks good. Now, I think that's going to be the same case for the overhanging oak branch, okay? And doing that in the VersaFine as well. Okay, let's see. I'm not using this whole thing. I'm just, kind of an overhanging branch here and there. We'll start off on the corner here. How's that? I'll make sure that I inked up enough of it. Okay. It's not quite as apparent as that one, but it's because it's up there. But we'll go with one or two more impressions, I would think. I'm not using a whole oak branch stamp either, so I'm not having to ink up the back of it here. Okay, I'm just inking up this portion. Okay, let's go try right there. Okay. It's just kind of creating a little bit more of a kind of a canopy of branches hanging down. Leaves and branches. Okay. Alright. That is a really thick ink. I know. My test prints there. Look how much they're kind of soaking through. That's when you can tell the ink is, you know, fairly fine and thick. I haven't used it too much, so even though it's a very old pad, it's relatively new in terms of the amount of ink that's in it. Okay, now what I was going to do was add a couple more little touches. Let's try this. This is one of the winter twigs images. Just to get in a couple little bit more textural touches. I have to be careful about these branches down here, or these reed blades, because they are really, really wet right now, but I want some things going on in here, so oops, not the memories versifying. I haven't used this versifying in a long time. I like the pad material. It's nice and dense. Okay. Alright, I'm going to tear this in half so I can avoid some of these reeds, maybe. Here. High-tech masking material. Okay, just a subtle little impression. Okay, I'll show you what this looks like a little bit closer up. So those little branches down there. Over here, kind of having those at the base, kind of add a little bit more texture. Yeah, I can even use a little bit more right here, I think. One right in that spot going up. I love texture, so these little types of details tend to really kind of add a certain type of look that I tend to be trying to go for. Okay, that was that. let me grab my little tiny rock stamp again, and I think I might want to add a few more of those, because this area down here got, you know, a certain value in terms of the amount of darkness. What's the word I'm looking for? It got it became you know, this dark, which, you know, it was not a plan or anything like that. It's not that it's an error, but sometimes you don't know how things are going to look after you add all those tones down. You might think, okay, it needs to go darker, darker, darker. But what I'm getting at is, you know, I can't really see a lot of those. I can see that my rock texture up here in the lighter area, but down here it kind of becomes really obscure. So what I can do is I can introduce these tiny rocks again, maybe in a darker hue, okay? So you can always go back to something and just stamp it darker. I can't necessarily make something lighter in many ways, but you can always make it kind of darker. And introduce that, and not because anything else was an error, but just because, you know, that's just the way the scene happened to go. So that's what I always say about my approach to scenes is it's not necessarily just a linear approach. Okay, we're starting off with composition, then adding color, little final embellishments, done. Oftentimes I stamp imagery, then put color over it. There might be some more imagery that goes into it, a little bit more color. So you just keep working it, you know. However you want it to go. Alright, now there's going to be a lot of waiting around for this to dry. So I'm going to stamp my subject matter in here, which will be the hiker and child again. This is probably my last in that series. This is a real small stamp, so I'm just, and this is a really new wet pad. So what I'm doing here with these test impressions is I'm making sure I'm not puddled up in any of the really tight detailed areas, okay? And also making sure that I got, you know, a nice full impression of the entire stamp. I don't want to stamp something out and be missing someone's head, you know? Because that's why you have a stamp positioner. You can kind of do it again, but you know, it's not my kind of idea of fun to go back and you know, to use a positioner to stamp, you know, to reclaim a certain part of an object that didn't stamp out in the first place. Okay, so there's my characters. They're floating in space right now, but there's no way that I'm going to add in a, you know, shadow at the base of their feet at this point in time, because the ink is just way too wet. Alright, so here you can just kind of see it there. You can kind of see that black, just how much it sticks out, but you know, that VersaFine is really kind of moist right now. See that? Here's the oak branches above. I love that VersaFine. Very effective pad, I can see, for those foreground images. It almost looks, it looks thick, almost embossed, you know, with like a detailed embossing powder or something like that. So I'll have to use that more. I'll incorporate it in. Okay, so pretty much done as far as the color scheme goes. I'll add in some maybe little details using some alcohol pens if I see fit. Definitely on the figures. You can see what kind of not coloring something kind of looks like. It looks out of place from the surrounding area, not having any tone in them, right? So that's where you have to do things like, you know, we add this tone to the trees to kind of flesh it out, even though there are shadows and texture within the design. If you don't kind of flesh it in and kind of, you know, make it all objects kind of equal importance in terms of your tone additions, it looks, you know, something like that will look out of place. So we'll color them in. We'll add a base shadow down here, probably the same colors as something like that. And then we'll add in our little embellishments in here, and it should be finished. Unless there's something else that occurs to me. But we'll see. Okay, I have come back hours later here at this point in time, and that VersaFine is still drying. Okay, now I do notice that is a instant dry pigment ink, but I think they mean on matte papers, so on the glossy paper it's really taken a while. It's set up in some areas. I don't know if you can see this branch right here, but say right here you can see where it's kind of dry, but this area right over here seems darker. It's because it's wet. Alright, now things are kind of drying to somewhat of a dull sheen, okay, but the spray will bring that back. But what I'm going to do very soon here is I'm going to throw on a workable spray fixative over the top of this so I can just start working on it. Again, I'm anxious to get going on this again because it's really gotten to the point where you know, I really have fun with these types of scenes. So anyways, this is a Blair spray fix. Okay, it's a workable matte fixative. Okay, a lot of times I'm spraying with a glossy spray, but I think this time around I think I would do it with a matte workable one, meaning I can kind of work over the top of it. Now, it's not really meant for dye-based things or something like that. You know, it's more of like a chalks, or there's charcoal here, graphite, Conte crayons, and so forth. Stuff in the art world. You know, where you can spray it on and just keep working over the top of it, but not, you know, spread everything around. So I think I'm going to do something like that, but I am going to start with a couple things here first. Okay. Now I've laid down some kind of your tan colors, a lot of the distressing types of tones, okay, those earthy kind of warm tones, and this Sharpie Peach paint pen should probably match with that fairly well. So I think I'm going to lay some of these little kind of detailed effects down in here just to establish a little bit more texture. And I'm going to keep it in an area of the scene that's kind of roughly the same value in terms of light and dark as this color, okay? This peach color, okay? Because I don't want it to stand out too much. I just kind of want an extra texture to kind of blend in with the surrounding area, but to give it a little bit of variation, you know, wherever it's applied. I'm kind of being careful not to touch these wet foreground images, or that figure, the figures on the road are probably a little wet too, so, you know, at this point in time, I definitely, at no point in time do I really want to smear things, but especially, you know, towards the end when, you know, you're almost, you know, done with the scene. So, the one thing about a workable spray fixative, I'm thinking that it probably wouldn't accept impressions over the top of it, you know, because I think it would seal the paper off anyway. So, you know, before I apply anything like that workable fixative, I want to have all the imagery already laid out, and I'll just have kind of like those little embellishment types of marks, applications remaining. So no impressions. And for the most part, I think all my shading is done. As far as the dye-based ink pad colors, I might, with a workable fixative, I think it'll be fine to apply some of the alcohol pens over the top of it. I think they would show up just fine. Okay, I'm just adding some aqua turquoise highlights into some of the background grasses, grassy textures, or grassy, not textures, but, well, I guess there is a little bit of texture with the sedge filler texturing in the back, but, you know, mostly the grassy colors, I guess you could say. And again, I'm kind of adding this mostly in an area that's somewhat of the same value. Alright, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. There, I'm zoomed in all the way. Let me see if I can focus in. Okay, you can see that kind of going on in the background a little bit. Some over here. We have some opportunities in here along the roadside, probably. Alright, that is the green. Alright, one of these pens, it's the Gel Extreme. I found these pens, and was it this one? It was either that one or the Jelly Roll. Was working pretty good on the paper. Maybe that wasn't it. Maybe the Jelly Roll. This is a really old set. No idea when I got it. But one of these pens, yeah, this one was it. This is the pen that I needed for that mustard plant scene, but I didn't have it. But these Jelly Rolls work pretty well for my purposes here. Kind of a little warm, you know, little yellow dots, of course. Got some textures going on. The background, that texture and contrast within the grassy area. Brings, kind of introduces a little bit of a variation, and thus kind of a little bit more visual excitement. Alright, my jelly roll seemed to have stopped working. Let me see if I can get this going. I was kind of surprised that it was working to begin with, because I hadn't used these, and I probably bought them, I don't know, 15 years ago, I'm guessing. It's by Sakura. They might have actually sent these to me one time. There was like a kit of Sakura, kind of drawing instruments. I think it was Sakura. They kind of gave me to test out. But I don't know, it's pretty good when you get a kind of a gel type of pen working that's been sitting around for so long. So many of those early incarnations of gel pens from other companies, and you know this, you know what I'm talking about if you're a kind of a long time stamper or scrapbooker, but a lot of the early incarnations of gel pens just didn't work, and I don't know if that's still the case with some brands, but I don't know, I guess this is not one of those, because I did not use this for a long time. You can even see it's like the plastic is cracked here. I don't know, maybe that's not from age, but you know, even the label looks a little bit dated. Okay, so anyway, let's see what this is looking like now. Take a look in the back of those trees. Isn't that variation? There's some green and yellow in there. Same thing down here. Right over here. Let me see if I can zoom in at all. Okay, kind of in here. And happening all over the place in there. I have a little bit of it down in the road as well, or alongside this road down here. Alright, jelly roll. White gel pen. And again, being careful not to touch these real wet elements, okay? Okay, this is the white, which would potentially stand out the most. So you have to kind of be careful about where you apply it. Maybe don't apply too much in the darker areas. Start off in your lighter areas to see what this is going to look like against kind of a tonal background. Okay, now those people still need to be colored. We need a little bit of shading underneath there. A little bit of texture on the road. You can see where I've kind of built out some of the dots, and then as I've come into the shaded area, I kind of trail it off a little bit. I don't have too much. You can see, I feel little white highlights in here, but as I move into the darker area, I don't really have any of it. I was going to say too much, but really any. Okay, add it. And a little bit of that texture. And I don't know, maybe I'll add a little bit in the distant little slope, kind of ends up being a little bit of the horizon line. Okay. I like it up on that horizon line. It has a light horizon up there, and I kind of have some of that starting up there and kind of dissipating as it moves away from that light. So see what it does for that lighting up there. It looks kind of brighter by having those highlights up there, and it's like the light is coming through here. We can use a little bit more definitive shading, I think, in here, but I don't know if I'm going to do that right now. But I think I will apply that workable fixative now, and do some work with a little bit of the alcohol pens and such. This will look good with some pigment ink on it as well, the white pigment ink. I'm thinking right up there on the horizon, maybe in back of these trees or something like that. Sides of some of the trees kind of facing the light, so it'll look like I want to reinforce more lighting in here, and maybe I can even add some shadows around here, around these twigs. So we'll figure it out, but I think it'll be fun. Okay, I'm in from outside, because you always want to spray these things outside with a lot of ventilation. Don't bring that in, any of those types of spray fixes and spray paints and so forth. But anyway, we can see, I think you can see that the saturation of the colors are more extreme, kind of more akin to kind of a freshly stamped scene, image, whatever. But that pigment ink, that VersaFine, is still a little bit wet. So you can see my finger right here, and what I do is I put it down over the top of that, and I can still see little dots. See those little dots? Those are the little areas where the VersaFine is still drying. I'll know at the end of this project if I would kind of advise against using that. If you've used it before and you know a good way to dry that, just write it in the comments section. But I don't know. I really love the impressions though with it on glossy cardstock. I guess what I can say is maybe just leave these types of things just for the very last step, and you know, if you're not going to be working on the cards for a while, or if you're done working on the card, you know, and you're fine with just kind of letting it dry for a long period of time, even after kind of spray sealing it, then why not, you know, if it gives you a really awesome impression. I don't know, we'll see. Because I'm going to have to wait for this to dry a little bit more. I do love how those foreground images look, though, on this cardstock, especially, you know, as far as the foreground images go. It just really stands out, which you kind of want. Okay, but I will let this set up longer. I'll probably give it overnight or something to dry or to set up. I could go in here and add some little kind of final touches, shading here and there, using the alcohol pens, but I'm just going to let this dry for a little bit. The workable spray fixative does dry fairly quickly, usually. But as far as the relative humidity in my area right now at this time, it seems kind of high, and it's also not very warm out, so it's taking things a little bit longer to dry. So I don't know. I'll give this overnight probably. Maybe I'll start working on another scene in the meantime. But anyways, I can't wait to add those finishing touches in here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, let's see what we're dealing with here. As far as moisture content, this VersaFine may never dry on here. It will, but it'll take a while. I sprayed a workable sealant on here, workable fixative, and what I can do is I'll just spray it with a Krylon when I'm all done. But I think it is dry enough or set enough where I can kind of go into it and not worry about it too much. Maybe a little bit, you know, because I don't want a bunch of smearing and such, but I don't know, we'll figure it out. Okay, now this is a previous scene, and I want to kind of match the colors on the clothes of the two figures walking. So I'm going to try to do some of that. And this is a permanent La Plume, which is an alcohol-based pen. Okay. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of fleshing in the characters with some tone, which they really need, to kind of anchor them in the scene. Okay. Now, we need some sort of shading or shadow effects. Right now the characters are kind of hovering, and like in this scene right here I have the little shadow, which is on the stamp design, but it's also been reiterated with a little bit of extra ink, okay? And we can see it right here. I wouldn't say the characters are floating, as there's a little bit of a shadow, but it's definitely not enough. So I'm looking for a color that I can put down, and I don't want it too dark, but I definitely want it dark enough. Okay, so that is a little bit too dark. Okay, see it like that. But you can take any lighter color, all right, of alcohol-based marker, and just kind of spread it around a little bit, like that, and that kind of blends it out somewhat. But anyways, now you have those little cast shadows, and I think it sets the characters in the scene more, wouldn't you think? Okay, now that being said, if I want to, I can kind of go in and add some extra little touches with this pen. Maybe we can kind of create some additional shadows. Oh, I'm doing it along some of these little twigs in the brush. Okay. Nothing too extreme, just kind of subtle details. You can kind of pair up with the the shadows over here, just putting, I don't know, some similar touches here and there. Okay. Okay, now let's see what I can do with a little bit of pigment ink in here. We have a lot of crisp imagery. It's kind of weird for me looking at this scene because I usually don't spray it until I'm kind of all done with my stamping and color embellishments and whatever. So I'm looking at a very vibrant scene in terms of the intensity and saturation of the colors. I guess that's good in a way because, you know, I can kind of see what I'm working with. Instead of spraying on kind of a duller, you know, surface and then, you know, spray fixing everything and, you know, seeing what happens. That way I'm kind of seeing more of what I'll be looking like in the end result ahead of time, ahead of where I usually am at this point. Okay. Usually, when, in other words, if you haven't seen any of these videos before, a lot of times the scene kind of dries in a little bit of a dull sheen, depending on what brands of inks I'm using. But what I usually do is I spray seal with an acrylic spray the scene afterwards, and it brings back kind of the vibrancy and saturation of a kind of a freshly stamped scene. Okay. Okay, I'm kind of illuminating that horizon up there. A little bit of light. I'm kind of being careful to avoid that oak branch stamp because it has it was done in that VersaFine. Okay. Yeah. Put a little bit down here, but I think I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to have that light coming in at the background. Soften that shadow a touch, maybe. Okay. Alright, now. Alright, I'm not going to touch too much of it because I don't want to get any of that VersaFine kind of smeared. Okay, now I'm going to see if I can get some little touches in here. This little orange kind of monarch. Silhouettes. Trying to figure out where I'd put them. I'm not going to have them draped on those branches. But let's see. Maybe you just put a couple here or there. This is a really tiny little detail. It's like a little just red dot, but I'm trying to do it in a little bit of a kind of a butterfly shape. These are western monarchs that they migrate kind of to the coastal regions of California during the winter. Some monarchs migrate all the way to Mexico, but these ones just kind of go from, I think, the mountain areas to the coast, all within the country. Okay, let's see. They look kind of weird, but it is a very weird sight, you know, when you see these things. Let's see. I think I'm going to change slightly the hue of some of these so that it's not just all one tone, okay? Kind of like that. I'll just say the light is catching some of them in the wings or something. So it just kind of becomes a little bit more of a design element. If these things were really flying around, you'd see them just draped on all these branches, but visually, I mean, that would make a statement, of course, of butterflies, but I don't know if I want to do that. I do like that two-tone thing, though, that's going on in the scene now, so I'm going to add a couple more of those types of things going on. Put some out of that meadow flying around. It is adding, the more I add some of these, the more I like it. I guess it's, I don't know, it's adding that common element throughout the scene. I actually looked kind of weird with just one or two of them now. If I kind of add more of them around, it kind of makes more sense from a kind of a thematically speaking. These butterflies would be draped all in the branches, and then in the morning they, you know, they're kind of all together, huddled, I guess, to kind of share warmth. And then just as the day starts kind of breaking and it's getting a little bit warmer, you see these kind of the clusters kind of breaking apart, and they'll kind of fall off the branch and kind of open their wings and kind of sun themselves a little bit. And then they're kind of flying all over the place, kind of when it's nice and sunny. But definitely an interesting sight. And was kind of extra interesting, kind of happening upon it on accident. Okay. Yeah, it looks like a, I don't know, little monarch migration type of look. Let's see. as far as the color scheme, you know, when you do these types of things, you don't have to go just, it doesn't have to be kind of a direct representation of kind of some location, event, or time of day or whatever. You just have to kind of cater. I mean, you can kind of use that as a guide, but inevitably, like, you know, unless we have the exact imagery to utilize and colors and whatnot, in order to achieve what we're going after, you just kind of have to take it in a certain direction. And then at some point in time, I usually depart from whatever I was kind of going after, and you just have to kind of let the scene kind of go on, not necessarily on its own. That's kind of the wrong description, but I don't know. It's somewhat true, you know. Like in here, these little butterflies kind of out there look kind of more, I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine a bunch of them up here in the trees on those limbs. Although, I don't know, maybe I should add a couple of them. I thought it would look kind of weird because it's just so dark up here. But I don't know, maybe I should do something. Yeah. Let me see. I'll add a couple little orange specks. How's that? I'm not going to add that other lighter color up there because I think that would look, it would stand out too much. Okay, that's just a few little dots up there. See up here? That represents kind of some monarchs high up on the branches. But what I was saying is you just have to kind of let your scene kind of go in whatever direction it seems to be heading in, or what will be kind of more ideally suited for the composition based on the materials that you have. And I have a certain set of, you know, stamp designs and whatnot. And there's certain things I'm kind of willing to do in terms of masking, you know, which is not much, because I don't like to do all that, and I don't like cutting out little pieces of paper, and I don't like tedium when it comes to stamping. That's not to say I don't like the look of it when someone else does it, but I just, you know, I'm too lazy for that, so... you know, as far as masking goes and things like that, some background trees would have been, you know, possibly interesting, like in between these trunks and the background, but, you know, I'd have to be cutting out things like post-it notes and whatever, and maybe even using a stamp positioner or whatnot. But anyways, maybe just keeping things simple in the background, you know, keeps the silhouette of the trees a little bit more defined. And that's fine with me. The trail came out pretty good, I think. I could possibly use some deeper shadows down here. You know, it'd be kind of really bold for me to, you know, to create some kind of shadows, if this is the light, you know, kind of coming across this way. But I think I would lose the, you know, the subject matter in here a little bit if I had some kind of deeper shadows and they weren't kind of standing against kind of a lighter background, you know, as far as being able to see the silhouette of them. But I don't know, maybe that'll be a, you know, another scene that I do that doesn't have, you know, those characters as a kind of a central focus. And going back to my comments as far as kind of creating stage lighting, you know, we have this background lighting, you know, as far as like a a backdrop, and you know, if you're a lighting director of a set or play or whatever stage production, you would aim a, you know, you'd put a spotlight down here on these characters. Anyways, so things don't have to be kind of one source lighting when it comes to any kind of artwork, really. So you can kind of take this scene or whatever you're doing, you know, you can think of an approach of using several different light sources. They can even be colored lights, you know, lighting different things in different ways and whatnot, and that kind of, you know, all contributes to the fun of, you know, the process. Some other things could be done in here, I guess. Maybe some additional tone, breaking up that area in there, perhaps. Ooh, this would be fun if I had like a little squirrel or something like that I could put on this tree, kind of vertical. Maybe that can be another design in the future. Anyways, I think that looks just about finished to me. Fun scene. I definitely learned something about diversifying, so I don't know, be careful with that if you use it. And I think a Krylon, like a crystal clear or something like that, will, you know, if I spray that on here, I think it'll seal it off really well, and I shouldn't really have to worry about those objects that were stamped in that pad being damp anymore. So, and you can also, a lot of you have heat guns and whatnot, you can possibly heat set it to expedite the process, but as I've said in a previous video, I tend to let things air dry as much as possible. I wouldn't put these outside in the sun or anything like that either, so, you know, because you can potentially, you know, these bright colored inks are prone to fading if you do something like that. So, but anyways, I'm not in any hurry, so I think I'll just let it dry just as is. Okay, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed the scene.